Luigi Mangione, he's accused of killing UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson, will not face the death penalty. The judge dismissed 2 counts against Mangione that, should he have been found guilty, might have brought a death sentence. Mangione now faces the possibility, if convicted, of life in prison without parole.
It is just before 7 in the morning in Midtown Manhattan, and the city is only beginning to wake up. The air is cold, the kind of cold that turns breath into fog, and the sidewalks outside a large hotel are quiet, save for the occasional early riser heading to work, or in this case, heading to a conference. A man in a hooded jacket stands near the entrance, waiting, patient, still, the way someone waits when they already know exactly what is about to happen. Another man approaches from the direction of a nearby hotel, walking briskly, the way people walk when they have somewhere important to be. A meeting to make, a room full of investors expecting him. He has no idea that his final steps on this earth are being counted down, second by second, by a stranger he has never spoken to in his life. What happens next takes only a few seconds, but it will dominate headlines, courtrooms, and dinner table arguments across the entire country for the next year and a half. We are not going to show you all of it yet, because before we get to the bullets, the blood, and the chaos, you need to understand something bigger, something that makes this story more than just another act of violence in a big city. This is the story of a killing that split a nation's sympathy in half, a manhunt that ended with a shrug in a fast food restaurant, and a legal battle so complicated that the accused killer is now facing 2 separate trials in 2 separate courts for the same December morning. Welcome back to Sidebar. I am Jesse Weber, and if you are new here, this is where we take the true crime cases everyone is talking about and give you the real story, the documents, the timeline, and the facts without the noise. Before we go any further, if you have not already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a true crime story like this one. Now let us get back to that morning. The man walking briskly toward the hotel entrance is Brian Thompson, and before he is ever described as a CEO, before he becomes a name attached to outrage and debate, he deserves to be remembered as something simpler, a person. Brian Thompson grew up in Iowa, in a working-class family, the kind of upbringing where nothing was handed to you, where you earned what you had through effort, patience, and time. He built a career over decades, climbing steadily through the insurance industry, eventually rising to lead UnitedHealthcare, one of the largest health insurance companies in the country, a position that came with power, but also with a target on his back that he likely never fully understood. He was a husband, he was a father, and on that December morning, he was simply a man heading into a hotel for an investors' conference, the kind of routine business trip he had made dozens of times before. His family was waiting for him at home, unaware that this ordinary morning would be the last one they would ever share with him. Now, back to the sidewalk, because this is where the story turns dark, and where the mystery truly begins. Surveillance cameras capture the moment clearly. A man in a hood raising a weapon, aiming it directly at Brian Thompson, and firing not once, but multiple times, in what investigators will later describe as a calculated execution-style attack. Thompson falls to the pavement, and within moments, the shooter is already moving, calm, unhurried, as if this had been rehearsed 100 times in his mind before he ever stepped onto that sidewalk. Investigators later reveal something chilling, found engraved on the shell casings recovered at the scene. 3 words: deny, defend, depose. Words widely associated with tactics some believe insurance companies use to avoid paying out claims, a detail that will fuel public debate for months to come. Was this random? Was this personal? Or was this a message aimed not just at one man, but at an entire industry? The shooter does not run in a panic. He does not sprint through traffic or scream for a getaway car. Instead, he calmly gets onto a bicycle and disappears into Central Park, blending into the city that had just witnessed a public execution in broad daylight. From there, he reportedly climbs into a taxi and eventually boards a bus, leaving the city and the state behind him entirely. Police move quickly, releasing surveillance images from a nearby Starbucks, showing a man with his face partially obscured, and investigators begin piecing together a trail that stretches from Manhattan sidewalks to a hostel where the same man had reportedly stayed the night before. smiling, relaxed, seemingly unaware or unbothered by what he was about to do. A reward is announced, $10,000 at first, then climbing to $60,000 once the FBI joins the search. And for 5 days, the entire country watches as law enforcement chases a man who seems to be one step ahead at every turn. Online, something strange begins to happen, alongside the outrage, alongside the grief for a man who left behind a family. A strange current of support begins to grow, comments praising the shooter, treating him less like a suspect and more like a symbol. Why would anyone celebrate a killing like this? And who is the man behind the hood, calm enough to vanish into a crowded park and calculated enough to leave a message behind in the very casings he fired? The search stretches across state lines, tension builds by the hour, and then, on an ordinary morning in Altoona, Pennsylvania, inside a McDonald's, a customer glances at a man quietly eating breakfast and freezes because his face looks exactly like the one plastered across every news channel in America. He has no idea in that moment that his ordinary morning is about to end the same way Brian Thompson's did, without warning and without any going back. The customer inside that McDonald's does not call out, does not point, does not make a scene. Instead, he quietly finds an employee and says the words that will end a 5-day manhunt. I think that is the guy from the news. Within minutes, officers arrive, and one of them, trained to stay calm in moments like this, walks up to the young man sitting quietly with his food and asks him a simple question. Have you been in New York City recently? It is not the answer that gives him away, it is the reaction. His hands begin to shake, his composure cracks, and in that instant, the calm, calculated figure from the surveillance footage becomes something far more human. A nervous young man caught finally after days of running. Police take him into custody, and what they find on him tells its own story. A ghost gun, a homemade, untraceable firearm, a silencer, and multiple fake identification cards. Items that suggest careful planning, not a moment of impulse or rage. This was someone who prepared, who thought ahead, who anticipated needing to disappear. And yet here he is, sitting in a McDonald's in Altoona, undone by a stranger's recognition. His name is Luigi Mangione, and almost immediately the story shifts because this is not the profile many expected. He is 26 years old, raised in Towson, Maryland, in a family with deep roots across Baltimore, roots in real estate, in healthcare, in country clubs, and in civic life, a family name that carries weight far beyond their own neighborhood. He graduated valedictorian from an elite private school, a school known for producing high achievers, students who go on to Ivy League universities and impressive careers, and Luigi Mangione fit that mold perfectly. He wrestled competitively, he built an interest in robotics and computer science early on, and he eventually attended the University of Pennsylvania, earning both a bachelor's and a master's degree, focusing on artificial intelligence, with a minor in mathematics. He interned at respected companies. He co-founded a game development club with friends, and by every outward measure, this was a young man with doors opening in every direction, the kind of future most people spend their lives working toward. So how does someone like this end up in handcuffs, accused of executing a stranger on a Manhattan sidewalk? This is where the story stops being simple, because Luigi Mangione is not easily reduced to a villain in a headline. He is, by many accounts, someone who was once genuinely kind, thoughtful, and deeply intelligent, someone people admired, someone people trusted. A former roommate later describes him warmly, recalling long conversations, recalling a person who cared about ideas, about the world, about doing something meaningful with his life. But somewhere along the way, something changed, and it appears to begin with pain, not the emotional kind at first, but something physical, a serious spinal injury that eventually required surgery. Friends recall him showing them unsettling images, screws and metal hardware fused to his spine, evidence of just how severe his condition had become and how much pain he had been quietly enduring. Chronic pain has a way of reshaping a person slowly, and in the months that follow his surgery, something else begins happening. Luigi Mangione starts disappearing, not physically at first, but socially, drifting away from friends, from family, from the version of himself people thought they knew. Messages pile up online, tagged to his name. One from a friend in July, gently asking if he is okay, wondering if he simply has no signal somewhere remote. Another later in the year, more worried, more direct. Nobody has heard from you in months. Even someone planning a wedding reaches out, reminding him of commitments he had made, asking, gently but firmly, if he could still be counted on, or if plans needed to change. His own mother becomes concerned enough to file a missing persons report, unsure whether he is somewhere specific or simply gone, unreachable, existing somewhere outside the reach of the people who love him. This is not the profile of a man plotting in isolation with hatred as his only companion. This is someone unraveling, quietly, painfully, in front of people who cared, but could not quite reach him in time. And yet, alongside the isolation, another thread begins to emerge, one far more troubling, tied not to his body, but to his mind. An account linked to him on a book-reviewing website, later made private, shows him engaging with the writings of Ted Kaczynski, the man known to the world as the Unabomber, and rather than dismissing those writings, the account praises them, calling the author clearly a mathematics prodigy, and noting how accurate many of his predictions about modern society turned out to be. Around the same time, a quote appears on his social media, borrowed from a philosopher, suggesting that it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society, a quote that, on its own, could mean almost anything, but placed here, in this context, begins to feel like a window into something forming quietly beneath the surface. Was this simply intellectual curiosity, the kind any thoughtful person might explore, or was this something deeper? A slow ideological shift, one that eventually convinced him that violence was not just justified, but necessary. The people who loved him could see he was disappearing, but they had no way of knowing where he was going. And then, on the day of his arrest, officers recover something that will change the entire tone of this case. A small, handwritten notebook found on him, filled with his own words, thoughts he apparently never shared with another living soul. We are not going to tell you what is written inside it yet, because what it says and how prosecutors plan to use it is where this story turns from a personal unraveling into a legal case that will divide courtrooms and the country for years to come. The notebook is small, plain, the kind of thing you could buy at any drugstore, and yet, according to prosecutors, its contents may be the single most important piece of evidence in this entire case. Inside, in his own handwriting, Luigi Mangione allegedly wrote about frustration with corporate America, about a system he believed was hurting ordinary people, and about a plan he had apparently been carrying in his mind for some time. One line in particular will follow him for the rest of this case. A senior law enforcement official who reviewed the notebook says it reads, "These parasites had it coming, and I do apologize for any strife and trauma, but it had to be done." To prosecutors, this is not the writing of a man reacting in a moment of rage. This is the writing of someone who planned, who justified, and who, in his own words, accepted responsibility before he was ever caught. But a notebook alone does not build a case, so investigators begin laying out everything else they have piece by piece, like a chain, each link connecting to the next. There is the surveillance footage from the Starbucks, showing a man matching his description, his face partially covered, moving with purpose through the store. There is footage from the hostel where he reportedly stayed the night before the shooting, this time unmasked, relaxed, even smiling, a stark contrast to the calculated figure captured on the sidewalk the next morning. There is footage from inside a taxi, again masked, again calm, forming a visual timeline that prosecutors say leaves little room for doubt about who was where and when. Then there is the physical evidence recovered at his arrest, the ghost gun, the silencer, the fake identification, items that, taken together, prosecutors argue, tell the story of a man who prepared carefully for what he intended to do, and prepared just as carefully for what he intended to do afterward, disappear. On paper, it looks like an open and shut case, overwhelming evidence, a clear timeline, and a suspect's own words appearing to confirm intent. But real cases are rarely that simple, and this one becomes more complicated the moment prosecutors decide how to charge him. Rather than facing a single trial, Luigi Mangione now faces two, running on two separate tracks, in two separate court systems, for actions tied to the very same morning. In New York State Court, he faces second-degree murder, along with weapons charges, carrying a potential sentence that could keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. In federal court, prosecutors originally pursued charges serious enough to carry the possibility of the death penalty, before a judge later dropped the murder and weapons counts, leaving Mangione to face 2 counts of stalking instead, charges that still carry a maximum sentence of life without parole. It is an unusual arrangement. 1 man, 1 incident, 2 prosecutions, each moving independently, each with its own judge, its own jury pool, and its own timeline. And just when the case seems to be moving steadily toward trial, a twist emerges, one that reshapes the entire narrative. Reports surfaced that Mangione's legal team had, in fact, been engaged in quiet discussions with federal prosecutors, exploring the possibility of a plea deal, a resolution that could have avoided a trial altogether. Those talks, according to sources familiar with the matter, fall apart just weeks before the case is set to move forward, and the reasons why remain unclear, leaving both sides to prepare for a trial that, only a short time earlier, might never have happened at all. If the evidence truly is as overwhelming as prosecutors describe, why would talks of a deal even take place, and why would they collapse so close to trial? The defense, for its part, is not staying quiet. Karen Friedman Agnifilo, leading his legal team, has publicly pushed back against what she describes as a troubling pattern. Prosecutors and law enforcement officials leaking details to the press, shaping public opinion long before either jury is ever seated. Her argument is not that the evidence does not exist, but that the way it has been handled, discussed, and dramatized in the media has already compromised her client's right to a fair trial. Mangione himself, through his legal team, has publicly stated that he does not support political violence, and that attempts to frame him as condoning it are, in his team's words, irresponsible and prejudicial. It is a case built on 2 very different narratives, prosecutors pointing to a notebook, a timeline, and physical evidence they say tells one clear story, and a defense pointing to leaks, pressure, and public assumption, arguing that the full truth has yet to be properly tested in a courtroom. Lost, at times, in the noise of legal arguments and public debate, is the quiet reality still sitting at the center of all of it, a family in mourning, largely absent from headlines, choosing silence over spectacle, grieving a husband, a father, a man who never got the chance to walk into that hotel that morning. Their silence says as much as any statement could. Before any of this reaches a jury, though, there are months of hearings still to come, arguments over whether the notebook can even be shown to jurors at all, whether it was obtained properly, whether its words can fairly be used against him. In one of those hearings, Mangione sits quietly in a Manhattan courtroom, dressed plainly, listening as lawyers on both sides argue over the fate of his own private thoughts he likely never expected another person to read, let alone a courtroom full of strangers deciding his future. Whatever the judge decides about that notebook may end up shaping the entire direction of this case, long before opening statements ever begin. By the time summer arrives, the sheer logistics of this case have become almost as complicated as the crime itself, because Luigi Mangione is no longer simply preparing for one trial, he is preparing for 2, running on separate calendars, in separate courthouses, each demanding his full attention at the exact same time. The state case is scheduled to begin in September, and the federal case, originally hoped for the fall as well, has now been pushed all the way to January, a decision that, on its surface, seems simple, but underneath, reveals just how tangled this entire process has become. To understand why, you only need to picture one moment, a single hearing, in a federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan, that captures the strange, almost surreal reality of this case better than any legal document ever could. Mangione is scheduled to appear before Judge Margaret Garnett, but the hearing does not begin on time because on his way in, he becomes trapped inside an elevator alongside the very marshals responsible for transporting him. For more than 30 minutes, building engineers work to free him, while a courtroom full of reporters, attorneys, and spectators wait, unaware of the strange scene unfolding just out of sight. When he finally arrives, he is still shackled at both his hands and his feet, dressed in tan prison clothing, and instead of walking in through the usual entrance, he is brought in through a door typically reserved for the judge, an unusual, almost jarring entrance that draws immediate attention across the packed room. It is a small moment, but it says something larger about where this case now stands, a defendant caught quite literally stuck between two systems, two prosecutions, two sets of expectations, all converging on one exhausted, closely watched young man. Judge Garnett does not hide her reasoning when explaining the new January date. She says plainly that it would be impossible to properly select a federal jury while Mangione and his legal team are simultaneously consumed by the demands of the state trial happening at the very same time. It is a rare public acknowledgement of just how strained this case has become, not just emotionally, but structurally, two courts effectively competing for the same defendant, the same lawyers, and the same limited hours in a day. To understand the stakes clearly, it helps to lay out exactly what each case involves, because the charges themselves are not identical, and the consequences differ depending on which courtroom ultimately decides his fate first. In New York State Court, Mangione faces second-degree murder, along with charges tied to criminal possession of a weapon, charges that, if proven, could result in decades behind bars, an intentional killing carrying a potential sentence of 15 years to life. In federal court, following the earlier decision to drop the murder and weapons counts that once made him eligible for the death penalty, he now faces 2 counts of stalking, charges that still carry the possibility of life imprisonment without the chance of parole. 2 courts, 2 juries, 2 definitions of justice, all built around the events of a single December morning. And while the legal system works through these complications with careful, deliberate pacing, something entirely different continues playing out beyond the courtroom walls in the far less controlled space of public opinion. Letters continue arriving at the detention center where Mangione is being held, an extraordinary volume of them, according to those close to the case, some offering support, some expressing frustration with the healthcare system itself, a system many Americans feel has failed them personally long before this case ever existed. For some, Luigi Mangione has become less of a defendant and more of a symbol, a stand-in for years of frustration, denied claims, rising costs, and a healthcare industry many feel prioritizes profit over people. It is a sentiment that, however understandable the underlying frustration may be, worries public officials watching this case unfold because it risks blurring the line between critique of a broken system and support for taking a human life. Pennsylvania's governor addresses this directly, in plain, unflinching language, stating that while he understands genuine frustration with the healthcare system, there can be no tolerance for one man deciding, on his own, using an illegal weapon, that his opinion matters enough to justify murder. It is a necessary, sobering counterweight, a reminder that no matter how sympathetic a motive might sound in theory, the reality on that sidewalk was a human life, ended suddenly, violently, and permanently. And that brings us back, once again, to the man at the center of the loss, so often overshadowed by legal debate and online noise, Brian Thompson. He does not get to weigh in on any of this. He does not get to explain his own choices, defend his career, or speak to the frustrations people have projected onto him, because his story ended that December morning, on a sidewalk, in front of a hotel he never made it into. Whatever verdict eventually comes, in either courtroom, it will not change that fact. A family already lived through the worst version of this story, long before any trial date was ever set. As September approaches, both legal teams intensify their preparation, prosecutors organizing evidence they believe tells a clear and damning story, defense attorneys preparing to challenge nearly every piece of it, arguing that public assumption has already outpaced actual proof. There is a growing sense, shared by legal analysts, journalists, and casual observers alike, that whatever happens over the next several months will shape far more than the fate of one man. It may shape how the country talks about healthcare, about justice, and about the uncomfortable space in between, for years to come. For now, though, all anyone can do is wait, watch, and prepare for a trial that has already proven, in every possible way, that this case was never going to be simple. So here is where this story stands. One shooting, captured on camera, one man in custody, and two separate courtrooms, each preparing to answer the same underlying question in its own way. Did Luigi Mangione plan and carry out the killing of Brian Thompson? And if so, what should it cost him? It sounds, on its surface, like a case that should be simple. A notebook allegedly filled with intent, surveillance footage tracing his movements, a weapon recovered at the scene of his arrest. And yet, as we have seen over the last several chapters, nothing about this case has been simple. Not the crime, not the suspect, and certainly not the path to trial. So as September approaches, let us walk through exactly what each side is expected to argue, because understanding this helps explain why so much is riding on a jury of 12 ordinary people, none of whom asked to be part of one of the most talked about criminal cases in recent memory. Prosecutors are expected to lean heavily on that handwritten notebook, treating it as the emotional and factual center of their case. A document they argue reveals not confusion, not rage, but calculated intent, written in his own hand, in his own words, describing a plan and its justification. Alongside that notebook, they will present the digital trail, the Goodreads account, the reposted quote questioning whether it is healthy to be well-adjusted to a sick society, and the physical evidence recovered at his arrest, the ghost gun, the silencer, the fake identification, building piece by piece, a portrait of a man who did not simply snap, but prepared. The defense, meanwhile, is expected to challenge nearly every part of that narrative, questioning how the notebook was obtained, whether it was properly secured as evidence, and whether the public conversation around this case has already made a truly impartial jury nearly impossible to find. They are also expected to challenge the broader assumptions the public has made, reminding jurors that online sympathy, personal frustration with healthcare, and viral commentary are not evidence and should have no place inside a courtroom built on proof, not public opinion. This is where the real emotional weight of this trial begins to settle, not in the legal arguments themselves, but in the impossible task placed on 12 strangers, who will be asked to walk into a room already shaped by months of headlines, letters of support mailed from across the country, and a governor publicly warning against turning an accused killer into a hero, and somehow still judge only what is placed in front of them. Can a jury truly separate the noise from the facts? Can 12 people set aside everything they have already heard and judge this case purely on what prosecutors can prove and what the defense can credibly challenge? That is the real mystery heading into this trial. Not simply what happened on that December morning, but whether the truth can still be heard clearly after everything that has been said about it since. And even then, even if a verdict is eventually reached in that Manhattan courtroom come September, this story does not end there, because a second trial, an entirely separate federal case, still waits in January, meaning whatever happens first is not a finish line, but simply one chapter in a much longer legal road. There may be no single moment where this case feels finally, completely closed, no clean ending where the country exhales all at once, only a long, staggered process, one courtroom, then another, each producing its own outcome, its own consequences, and its own share of public reaction. It is worth pausing here, honestly, to sit with something uncomfortable, because the frustration so many people feel toward the healthcare system in this country is real. It is widespread, and it is often rooted in genuine pain, denied claims, unaffordable care, and a sense that ordinary people are left to fight battles no one should have to fight alone. That frustration deserves to be acknowledged, not dismissed, but acknowledging it does not require excusing what happened on that sidewalk, because holding both truths at once, real anger at a broken system and real accountability for taking a human life, is not contradictory, it is simply honest. And so, before we close, it feels important to return, one final time, to the person who so often gets lost in all of this, not the suspect, not the ideology, not the online debate, but Brian Thompson, a husband, a father, a man from Iowa who built a career over decades, who woke up on an ordinary December morning expecting nothing more than a routine business trip and never came home. Behind every legal filing, every hearing, every argument over evidence, there is a family who has spent the last year and a half grieving quietly, largely outside the spotlight, carrying a loss that no verdict in either courtroom will ever fully repair. So where does that leave us waiting? Honestly, because the real answers here were never going to come from social media, from viral posts, or from strangers online deciding who deserves sympathy and who does not. They are going to come from a courtroom, from sworn testimony, from evidence tested under cross-examination, and from 12 people who did not choose to be part of this story, but now hold real weight in how it ends. Whatever the outcome, in September and later in January, this case will likely be studied, debated, and remembered for years, not just as a criminal trial, but as a moment that forced an entire country to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, anger, and where the line truly sits between the two. Thank you so much for watching this story with us from beginning to end. If you want to stay updated as this trial unfolds, go ahead and hit subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.